The salt spray stung Julian Thorne's face as he walked towards the Salty Siren. The best, and only, really, upscale seafood restaurant in Port Blossom. Tonight was his night. After years of coding until his fingers cramped, debugging software in his sleep, and navigating the shark-infested waters of the startup world, he'd finally done it. He was lead developer. The promotion came with a hefty raise. Enough to finally escape his tiny, damp apartment overlooking the less-than-scenic fish processing plant. Enough, perhaps, to even start thinking about a future. Eleanor Vance, his boss, CEO of Coastal Coders, the company that was single-handedly trying to drag Port Blossom into the 21st century, had insisted on a celebratory dinner. It wasn't just Julian, a few key team members were there, along with, at Julian's slightly hesitant request, his parents and his younger brother, Liam. He wanted them to see this, to understand what he'd achieved. He craved their validation. A validation that had always felt just out of reach. The restaurant, with its nautical-themed decor and the faint, ever-present smell of the sea, was buzzing. Eleanor, a whirlwind of tailored suits and sharp wit, had secured a large table near the window, offering a panoramic view of the harbor. Fishing boats, their paint peeling and their nets piled high, bobbed alongside sleek, modern yachts, a visual representation of Port Blossom's ongoing identity crisis. As they settled in, drinks were ordered, the clinking of glasses a counterpoint to the raucous cries of seagulls outside. Eleanor raised her glass, her smile radiating genuine pride. "To Julian," she announced, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Our new lead developer. He's not just brilliant, he's relentless. He's the reason we're on the map. And he deserves every bit of this success." Julian felt a flush of warmth spread across his cheeks. He beamed, catching his mother's eye. Martha offered a small, tight smile. His father, Arthur, a man built like a weathered oak tree, his face etched with the lines of countless hours spent battling the elements, simply grunted. Liam, ever the charmer, grinned. But there was a hollowness to it that Julian had learned to recognize. Then, Arthur spoke, his voice a gravelly rumble that silenced the table. "Well, that's all well and good, Eleanor. But that extra money? It should go to Liam. He needs it more." The air thickened. Julian felt like he'd been plunged into the icy depths of the North Atlantic. He stared at his father, his mouth slightly agape, hoping, praying this was some twisted fisherman's joke. "Dad, what?" he managed to stammer. Arthur sighed, a sound like air hissing from a punctured tire. He explained, his voice heavy with a weary resignation, that Liam had plans, big plans. He was investing in some new venture. Arthur waved his hand vaguely. Liam jumped in, his smile now firmly in place, all charm and practiced ease. "It's a crypto-aquaculture venture, Dad. Revolutionary. Sustainable seafood farming. Powered by blockchain technology. It's the future," he declared. Julian knew this venture. It was Liam's latest in a long line of get-rich-quick schemes, each more fantastical and less grounded in reality than the last. He'd sunk money into artisanal seaweed snacks, ocean-powered drone delivery, and a disastrous attempt to breed bioluminescent lobsters for the luxury restaurant market. Each venture had ended the same way, with Liam broke, and their parents quietly bailing him out. Martha, ever the dutiful wife, nodded in agreement with Arthur. "Liam needs a boost," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He's got potential." Eleanor, who had been watching this exchange with a mixture of amusement and growing disbelief, set her glass down with a sharp click. "That's interesting," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Because Liam is getting precisely zero of Julian's raise." Arthur's bushy eyebrows shot up. He looked at Eleanor with undisguised challenge. "Excuse me?" Eleanor turned to Julian. "What was the percentage increase, Julian?" Julian, still reeling, managed to stammer, 60%. Eleanor nodded, her gaze unwavering. 60%. And every single penny of that is going into Julian's account. Because he earned it. He built this. He didn't spend his nights chasing pipe dreams. He spent them building a future. She turned back to Arthur. Her expression now carved from ice. I don't know what kind of arrangement you had in mind, Mr. Thorne, but let me be perfectly clear, you don't get to decide where Julian's money goes. And neither does Liam. Liam, for once, looked genuinely uncomfortable. He fidgeted, avoiding Julian's gaze. Arthur's face turned a shade of red that rivaled the cooked lobsters. On the platter in front of him. You don't understand. He growled, his voice low and menacing. Family helps family. Eleanor smiled, a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. You're right, I don't. But I do understand meritocracy. And I understand that you don't get to dictate what help looks like. And then, the dam broke. Martha was the first to erupt. How dare you speak to us like that, she shrieked. Her voice shrill and piercing. We're his parents. He wouldn't be anything without us. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, utterly unfazed. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, he got here in spite of you. Arthur slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. He turned to Julian. His voice a furious roar. You're going to sit there and let her talk to us like that? After everything we've done for you? After all the sacrifices? You're going to let your brother struggle while you hoard all that money? Liam, predictably, remained silent. He'd mastered the art of the hangdog expression. Letting his parents fight his battles. He'd perfected the role of the perpetually struggling. Misunderstood genius, always on the cusp of greatness, if only someone would believe in him. And suddenly, something shifted within Julian. He saw it all, the years of being told he wasn't practical like his father. That his interest in computers was a hobby, not a career. The constant comparisons to Liam. The charismatic one, the one with big ideas, even if those ideas were consistently terrible. The way they'd always expected him to be the responsible one, the anchor. While Liam was allowed to drift, untethered and unaccountable. He'd spent his entire life feeling grateful for the bare minimum, a roof over his head. Food on the table, clothes on his back. They'd weaponized basic parental responsibilities, making him feel like he owed them a debt he could never repay. He'd given and given. And given, and they'd taken, and taken, and taken. Never once considering that he might have dreams, aspirations, desires of his own. He looked at Liam, who finally met his gaze. And in Liam's eyes, Julian saw not gratitude. Not even shame, but a flicker of entitlement. That was it. The final straw. Julian took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly beneath the table. No, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. The table froze. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Arthur leaned forward, his face contorted with rage. What did you just say? He demanded. Julian met his father's gaze, his own unwavering. I said no. I'm not giving Liam my raise. I earned it. And it's mine. Liam's carefully constructed facade crumbled. But I need it, he whined. His voice cracking. The investment, the future. Arthur turned on Julian, his face a mask of fury. You ungrateful little. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him. Watch it, Thorne. But Arthur was beyond listening. He was a force of nature, a storm unleashed. We raised you, he bellowed. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us? By letting your own brother drown? Martha joined in, her voice laced with venom. Do you think you got here all by yourself? Do you think we didn't sacrifice for you? We worked our fingers to the bone so you could have a decent life, and now you're too good for us? Too good for your own family? And then, the nuclear option. Martha crossed her arms. Her face set in a mask of righteous indignation. If you don't want to help, fine. But don't expect us to support you anymore. Support. The word hung in the air, thick with irony. Julian stared at his mother, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of her statement. And then, he laughed. It wasn't a pleasant laugh, it was sharp, bitter. The sound of years of suppressed frustration finally bubbling to the surface. Support, he repeated, shaking his head. You think I still need your support? You haven't supported me in years. The moment I turned 18. You told me I was on my own. I worked my way through college. I paid my own rent. I built my career without a single ounce of help from either of you. Arthur's face went pale. He stammered, trying to deny it. That's not true. Isn't it? Julian snapped. Who did you help through college? Me or Liam? Who did you bail out of every financial mess? Me or Liam? They didn't answer. They didn't need to. Julian already knew. He'd watched Liam drop out of community college, bounce between dead-end jobs, and blow through every penny they gave him, secure in the knowledge that there was always more where that came from. He, meanwhile, had worked 2 jobs while taking a full course load, subsisting on instant noodles, and the faint hope that someday it would all be worth it. You didn't support me, Julian said, his voice shaking with emotion. You abandoned me. And now that I finally have something for myself, you expect me to just hand it over? Arthur's jaw clenched. He's your brother, he roared. And there it was. The ultimate justification. Liam was family. That meant he was entitled to everything, regardless of his own actions, his own choices. Julian turned to Liam, his hands gripping the edge of the table. You had a job, didn't you? Several, actually. What happened to them? Liam sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. They just didn't work out, he mumbled. They didn't work out, Julian repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Like the one before that? And the one before that? Silence. Julian let out a long, slow breath, then leaned back in his chair. I don't care. You are not my responsibility. Liam's lip trembled, and then he exploded. You're such a selfish prick, he screamed, slamming his hand on the table. The sound reverberated through the suddenly silent restaurant. After everything I've been through, you still won't help? My future is on the line, and you're sitting here bragging about your stupid job. You don't even need this money. You're just going to waste it on. He trailed off, unable to articulate what Julian might possibly spend his hard-earned money on. Something that would be wasteful in his eyes. The sheer entitlement dripping from every syllable was nauseating. That was the final, definitive break. A lifetime of resentment, of being overlooked and undervalued, crashed over Julian like a rogue wave. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The entire restaurant was staring. But he didn't care. The gazes felt like pinpricks compared to the burning inferno of righteous anger that had finally ignited within him. You know what, Liam, he said, his voice dangerously low, grabbing his coat. He kept his eyes locked on his brother's, refusing to give him the satisfaction of looking away. Figure it out. Figure out your own life, for once. Stop expecting everyone else to clean up your messes. Stop expecting handouts. Stop being a parasite. And then, he walked out. He didn't look back, not when his mother started yelling after him, her voice a shrill, desperate screech that clawed at his back. He didn't look back when his father slammed his fist on the table, the sound like a thunderclap in the sudden, stunned silence. He didn't look back when Liam wailed about the unfairness of it all, his cries echoing out into the night, a pathetic symphony of self-pity. As he stepped out into the cool night air, his heart pounding, his hands still shaking, he felt a strange sense of lightness. A burden he hadn't even realized he was carrying. A burden of guilt and obligation and misplaced loyalty had been lifted. He took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs, feeling cleaner, purer than the manufactured atmosphere of the restaurant. And then, he saw her. Eleanor. She was standing on the sidewalk, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She had followed him out, leaving the wreckage of his family dinner behind. She tossed a wad of cash onto the table inside, enough to cover the bill. And then some, a final, defiant gesture, and joined him. "Hell of a speech," she said, her voice laced with admiration. There was a glint of steel in her eyes, a hint of the ruthlessness that had made her a successful CEO. She understood what he'd just done, understood the courage it had taken. Julian let out a shaky laugh. "You think they'll ever talk to me again?" He tried to sound flippant, but the question was genuine. A part of him, a small, deeply buried part, still craved their approval, even after everything. Eleanor shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "Do you even care?" He thought about it, really thought about it, for the first time in his life. He considered the years of strained conversations, the forced smiles, the constant feeling of walking on eggshells. He thought about the endless cycle of Liam's failures and his parents' enabling. And the answer was a resounding, liberating no. He didn't care. He was free. "No," he said, the word a quiet affirmation, a declaration of independence. "I don't." He should have known it wouldn't end there. People like Arthur and Liam, they don't just let things go. They were like barnacles, clinging stubbornly to whatever they could latch onto, sucking the life out of everything around them. For a few blissful days, Julian ignored the texts, the calls, the voicemails, a toxic cocktail of guilt trips, accusations, and outright rage. He blocked his parents. He blocked Liam. He immersed himself in his work, throwing himself into the challenges of his new role with a renewed vigor. He was finally able to focus, to create, to build, without the constant weight of his family's expectations dragging him down. He started to enjoy his small apartment, transforming it from a temporary shelter into a home. He even started to tentatively explore the dating scene, something he'd always felt too burdened, too responsible, to pursue. He was wrong. The illusion of peace was shattered, brutally and irrevocably. One afternoon, he was in his office, finally enjoying the peace and quiet. The satisfaction of knowing his raise was his, truly his, when his phone rang. It was his bank. The caller ID displayed the bank's official number, and a sense of unease settled in his stomach. "Mr. Thorne? We're just calling to verify a transaction request," the woman on the other end said, her voice polite but with a hint of professional caution. Julian frowned. "Transaction request? I haven't requested any transactions." "Yes, a scheduled transfer from your account to a personal account under the name Liam Thorne. The amount is substantial," she continued, her voice now tinged with concern. Julian's blood ran cold. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt a sickening sense of déjà vu, a horrifying echo of the dinner from hell. "I didn't authorize any transfer," he said, his voice tight, his hand gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. The woman on the line hesitated. "Well, it was initiated through your online banking. The login was from a familiar IP address, one that has been used to access your account before." And that's when he knew. Liam, somehow, had gotten access to his account. The charming, manipulative, perpetually failing Liam had tried to steal from him. He'd likely guessed passwords, or perhaps even found them written down somewhere, preying on Julian's past attempts to be helpful, to be the responsible one. The sheer audacity, the brazen betrayal, was breathtaking. "Cancel it," Julian said immediately, his voice sharp and commanding. Cancel everything. And flag my account. No transactions are to be authorized without my explicit, in-person confirmation. The woman sighed in relief. Already done, sir. We had a feeling something wasn't right, given the unusual nature of the request and the amount involved. But we had to confirm with the account holder. We've already taken steps to secure your account further. Julian hung up, his mind racing. He felt violated, betrayed, furious. And then, another call came in. Blocked number. He knew who it was. He knew what was coming. The predictable cycle of denial, accusation, and self-pity. He answered, putting it on speaker, wanting to get it over with. Wanting to hear the pathetic excuses, the manufactured outrage. What the hell did you do? Liam's voice shrieked through the phone, distorted with rage and panic. Julian exhaled slowly, a cold calm settling over him. You really thought I wouldn't find out? He asked, his voice devoid of emotion. I needed that money. Liam wailed, his voice cracking. It's not fair. You have everything, and I have nothing. Julian laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound that echoed the emptiness he felt inside. You mean my money? The money you tried to steal? The money I earned? I wasn't stealing it. Liam snapped, his voice rising in pitch. I was just borrowing it. I was going to pay you back. I swear. It was for the investment. The crypto aquaculture thing. It's going to be huge. You'll see. With what? Julian asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Another failed get-rich-quick scheme? Another harebrained idea that will inevitably collapse. Leaving you broke and begging for more? Silence. And then, the waterworks started. The crocodile tears, the practiced sobs. The pathetic attempts at manipulation. You don't understand. I have bills. The investment. I'm on the verge of something great. You're just too selfish to see it. You've always been selfish. Julian hung up. He didn't need to hear any more. He'd heard it all before, countless times. The same excuses, the same accusations, the same self-pity. It was a broken record. A tired refrain that had lost all meaning. And then, he called the police. He thought that would be the end of it. A final, decisive act, a severing of all ties. He pressed charges. It wasn't a huge amount of money, Liam hadn't actually managed to transfer anything, but it was enough for the police to take it seriously. Attempted theft, fraud, unauthorized access to his accounts, the list was long enough. He braced himself for the fallout, for the inevitable barrage of calls, the fake apologies. The accusations from his parents, the renewed claims of his selfishness and heartlessness. He wasn't prepared for what happened next. Because Liam hadn't been working alone. 2 days later, he received an email from his bank. Another attempt had been made to access his account. This time, it wasn't an online transfer. It was an in-person withdrawal attempt. A substantial amount, nearly everything he had. By his mother. Julian stared at the email, his body numb, his mind struggling to process the information. His own mother had walked into his bank, armed with whatever personal information she still had about him, old addresses, his social security number. Details she'd gleaned over the years, and tried to empty his account. She'd told the teller that Julian had authorized it, that he was too busy with his fancy new job and had asked her to handle it for him. She'd even feigned a worried expression, claiming he was unwell and needed the money for medical expenses. But the bank had flagged it, thanks to Liam's earlier attempt. And Julian's subsequent instructions. They'd put extra security measures on his account. Multiple layers of verification. Martha had walked right into a trap. A trap set not just by the bank, but by her own greed and desperation. Julian called the bank immediately, his hands shaking as he dialed. As he was on the phone, confirming the details, demanding further action, a text message popped up. From his father. A text message flashed on Julian's screen. He read his father's furious words. "You went too far. You should have just given Liam the money. Now look what you've done. You forced our hand. Forced their hand." That was it. That was the moment Julian knew, with absolute certainty. With a clarity that cut through the years of emotional manipulation and guilt. That they were never truly his family. They were parasites, leeches. Who had seen him not as a son, but as a resource to be exploited. He forwarded everything to the police, the email from the bank, the text message from his father, the details of Liam's previous attempt. He provided them with everything they needed to build a solid case. The police took it seriously. Very seriously. 2 attempted fraudulent transactions. 1 digital, 1 in person. A clear pattern of behavior, a conspiracy to defraud him. Liam and Martha were both charged: fraud, attempted theft, identity theft, conspiracy. The charges were significant, carrying the potential for serious jail time. When they were arrested, Arthur went ballistic. He showed up at Julian's apartment. Pounding on the door, his face red with rage, his eyes wild with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He was screaming, his voice hoarse and cracking. About how Julian was tearing the family apart. How he was sending his own mother to jail, how he was a monster, a traitor, an ungrateful son. Julian stood behind the locked door, his heart hammering in his chest. Listening to the man who had never protected him, not once. Now losing his mind because Julian had finally protected himself. He didn't open the door. He didn't engage. He didn't give Arthur the satisfaction of a confrontation. Then, he said the last thing he would ever say to his father. Speaking through the closed door, his voice cold and steady. "You did this to yourself. You and Mom and Liam. You made your choices. And now you have to face the consequences." And then, he called the police, again. He reported the harassment, the threats. The attempted intimidation. He requested a restraining order. He was done. He was finished with them. Even after everything, Arthur wouldn't let it go. Liam, facing the reality of his situation, and represented by a public defender, took a plea bargain. He got probation, community service, and a hefty fine he had no way of paying. Martha, however, fought the charges, claiming she was innocent, that it was all a misunderstanding. That Julian had given her permission. She hired a lawyer, a slick, expensive lawyer Arthur somehow managed to afford, probably by taking out another loan. But Arthur, he blamed Julian. Not them. Him. He saw Julian as the villain. The architect of their downfall, the one who had betrayed the sacred bonds of family. He called Julian every name in the book. He told every relative who would listen, and there were fewer and fewer who would listen, that Julian was cold, selfish, and evil for letting his own family suffer. He painted himself as the victim. The long-suffering father who had sacrificed everything for his children, only to be betrayed by his ungrateful son. At first, Julian ignored it. He blocked Arthur, blocked everyone who took his side. Everyone who tried to guilt him, everyone who dared to suggest that he should have just given Liam the money. He focused on his work, on his new life, on building a future free from the toxic influence of his family. He started therapy, working through the years of emotional baggage, the ingrained guilt, the deeply rooted feeling of inadequacy. But then, he discovered something interesting. Something that changed everything. His parents, for all their talk of family and sacrifice, had always been obsessed with appearances. To the outside world, to the small, insular community of Port Blossom, they were the perfect couple, the loving parents. The pillars of the community, the salt of the earth. Arthur, the gruff but honest fisherman, working tirelessly to provide for his family. Martha, the devoted wife and mother, always putting her children first. Liam, the charming, if somewhat troubled, son, with so much potential. But it was a lie. A carefully constructed facade, designed to hide the truth that they were drowning in debt, living beyond their means, constantly scrambling to keep up appearances, all while exploiting Julian's success and blaming him for their failures. And Julian, he had proof. A month after Martha was released from jail, pending her trial, a message arrived. He had not spoken to the sender in years, an old acquaintance from the fishing community. A contemporary of Arthur's named Captain Salty Peterson. The message arrived on his phone, a blast from the past. It began with a gruff sort of sympathy, a sentiment that sounded almost foreign coming from someone who'd known his father for so long. Heard about what happened with your folks, the message read. Just wanted to say, I always knew Arthur was a blowhard. Full of hot air. And empty promises. Good for you, standing up to him. Took guts. That simple message a spark of hope that maybe he was not alone. Before Julian could respond, another message arrived from Salty Peterson. It asked, almost casually, with a hint of something unspoken lurking beneath the surface. By the way, this second message inquired, you know about the boat, right? The boat. Julian blinked, staring at the words on his phone screen. What boat? He had no idea what Salty Peterson was talking about. A vague sense of unease. A cold knot of premonition tightened in his stomach. He quickly typed a reply. What boat? I don't know anything about a boat. The response came almost immediately, a single, stark sentence that felt like a punch. To the gut, the golden anchor. Your father bought it. Big, fancy thing. Said he got a loan? Used your name, I heard. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The golden anchor. He'd heard the name whispered around the docks, a symbol of Arthur's ambition. His desperate attempt to reclaim some long-lost glory, to prove himself to the community. To himself. It was a state-of-the-art fishing vessel. Far beyond anything Arthur could have realistically afforded. It was a monument to his pride. And, it now seemed, to his deceit. Used his name. The words echoed in Julian's mind, a horrifying revelation. He felt a surge of anger, so intense, so consuming, that it left him shaking. They'd stolen from him again. Not just money, not just his peace of mind. But his identity, his credit, his future. He dug into it, relentlessly, driven by a burning need for the truth, for justice. He contacted his bank, requesting copies of all loan applications. All financial records associated with his name and social security number. He pulled his credit reports, scrutinizing every detail, every entry, every inquiry. He spent hours poring over documents, his eyes burning, his head pounding. Fueled by a mixture of rage and disbelief. And there it was, a $100,000 loan, taken out in his name, with his forged signature. Used to purchase the golden anchor. The loan application was a masterpiece of deception. Filled with fabricated information, inflated income figures, and outright lies. His signature, expertly forged, appeared on every page. A damning testament to his parents' betrayal. They had used his good credit, his clean financial history, to secure a loan they could never have obtained on their own. They had gambled with his future, risked his financial security. All to feed Arthur's ego and Liam's endless stream of failures. He gathered everything, every fraudulent document, every forged signature. Every piece of evidence that proved what they had done. He organized it meticulously. Creating a detailed file, a damning indictment of his parents' crimes. He felt a cold, hard determination settle over him, a resolve that replaced the initial shock and anger. He would not let them get away with this. He would not be their victim any longer. Then, he called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best. Most ruthless attorney he could find, someone who specialized in fraud cases. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Arthur's bluster or Martha's crocodile tears. He found her through a referral from Eleanor, who had connections in the legal world that stretched far beyond Port Blossom. The lawyer, a woman named Sarah Chen, listened to his story, her expression hardening with each detail. She examined the documents, her eyes narrowing, her lips thinning into a grim line. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "They're cooked," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This is an open and shut case. We have overwhelming evidence. We can sue them for fraud, for identity theft, for damages. We can get that boat seized. We can make them pay." His parents thought they were untouchable. They thought he wouldn't dare go after them. They thought he was still the same timid, compliant boy they had always manipulated and controlled. They believed their lies. Their fabricated image of the perfect family would protect them. They were wrong. With Sarah Chen's help, Julian filed fraud charges against both of his parents. He sued them, seeking to recover the full amount of the loan, plus damages, plus legal fees. He took them to court, initiating a legal battle that would expose their lies, shatter their carefully constructed facade, and bring them to their knees. And when they saw him walk into that courtroom, armed with documents, lawyers, and a burning sense of righteous anger, a cold fury that had replaced the years of hurt and resentment, they knew. They knew they'd finally messed with the wrong person. They saw the determination in his eyes, the steel in his spine, the unwavering resolve that had replaced the timid boy they had once known. The case was open and shut, as Sarah Chen had predicted. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. They had taken out a loan in his name, forged his signature, and used his credit to fund their lifestyle and Liam's delusions. The loan documents, the forged signatures, the bank statements, the text messages from Arthur. It all painted a clear picture of their guilt. Arthur tried to bluster his way through it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that he had intended to pay back the loan, that it was all for the family. Martha played the victim, weeping and wailing, claiming she was just trying to help her son, that she had been manipulated by Arthur. Liam, predictably, remained silent, his eyes downcast, his usual charm nowhere to be seen. But their lies fell apart under the weight of the evidence, under the relentless questioning of Sarah Chen. She dismantled their defenses, exposed their deceit, and revealed them for what they were: liars, thieves, and manipulators. The verdict: they lost. Resoundingly, spectacularly, and completely. Martha was facing more jail time, a longer sentence this time, with no possibility of early release. Arthur was bankrupt, his assets seized, his reputation ruined. The golden anchor, the symbol of his pride and his deceit, the boat he had stolen from his own son, was repossessed and sold at auction, the proceeds going towards repaying the loan. Liam, stripped of his financial safety net, his parents' support, was finally forced to face the consequences of his own actions. He lost his apartment, his fancy car, also financed through questionable means, and his dreams of crypto-aquaculture glory. He ended up working as a deckhand on a rundown fishing trawler, a far cry from the revolutionary future he'd envisioned. A bitter irony that Julian found grimly satisfying. And Julian? He took everything back. He recovered the money, he cleared his credit. He restored his reputation. He won, not just in court, but in life. The last time Julian saw his father, Arthur was standing outside the courtroom, his face etched with defeat and a simmering rage, a broken, bitter old man. He looked at Julian with eyes filled with hatred, with a venomous resentment that was almost palpable. "You destroyed this family," Arthur hissed, his voice trembling, the words choked with bitterness. Julian smiled, a cold, hard smile, a smile that held no warmth, no forgiveness, only a quiet, steely satisfaction. "No," he said, his voice calm and steady, his gaze unwavering. I just finally stood up to the people who tried to destroy me. And then, he walked away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He was free. He moved out of Port Blossom, leaving the toxic atmosphere of his hometown behind. He got a new job, an even better job, with a company that valued his skills and his dedication. A company that recognized his worth, a company where he could thrive. He bought a small house, overlooking a quiet, peaceful stretch of coastline. Far from the judging eyes and the whispered rumors of Port Blossom. He started dating. Cautiously at first, but then with a growing sense of hope. Finding someone who appreciated him for who he was, not for what he could provide. He never spoke to his parents or Liam again. He cut them out of his life. Completely and irrevocably. He erased them from his memory, as much as he could. Focusing on building a new life, a better life, a life free from their toxic influence. And for the first time in his life, Julian Thorne was finally, truly free. The anchor that had weighed him down, the anchor of guilt and obligation. And misplaced loyalty, had been cut loose. He was sailing his own course. Charting his own future, and the horizon was bright. He occasionally checked social media. Just enough to see evidence of Liam's continued spiral and his parents' further descent into financial ruin and social ostracization. It was a grim satisfaction, a cold comfort. But a satisfaction nonetheless. He had won, not just in court, but in life. He had broken free, and that was a victory sweeter than any revenge. A victory that resonated with a deep, profound sense of peace. He was finally, unequivocally, himself.